Hello and welcome to Legal Action. I'm attorney Susan O'Neill Alvarado, and I'm here today with three of our top lawyers from the DuPage County Bar Association to talk about the important legal issues surrounding startups and existing small businesses. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to attorney Stephen Ruffalo. Steve is a member of the law firm of Fuchs and Roselli, where he focuses his practice on resolving commercial and business-related disputes. Steve's been in practice for more than 22 years. Steve, interestingly, also served recently as the president of the DuPage County Bar Association. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Susan.
Nancy Fallon Houle is a business lawyer with 26 years of experience in the area of business law. For the past 12 years, we've been fortunate enough to have Nancy operate her own private practice close by in Downers Grove. And finally, to my right, attorney Jerry Cassiope has practiced business law for more than 30 years. He's the managing partner of Nyberg and Cassiope, attorneys at law in Naperville. And Jerry was recently named the DuPage County Bar Association Lawyer of the Year. Congratulations and welcome, Jerry. Well, we're here today to discuss the legal issues surrounding startups and existing small businesses. This is a particularly important area to discuss, I believe, with our viewers, given the current economic environment. I believe many people actually wake up and wonder if perhaps they might want to start their own business because the economy is so tough. So what I'd like to do, if we might, is start out with talking about how to plan, the planning stage before starting a new business. Steve and Jerry, how about if you're currently working, if a viewer is currently working for a current employer and has a non-compete clause in their employment contract, how does that affect possibly starting their own business? Jerry, would you like to start?
Sure, absolutely. If you're working for a company where you have an employment agreement or you're getting potentially a severance agreement, it could contain a non-compete, which, depending on what sort of business you wanted to start, it could prohibit you for a certain period of time. Now, obviously, every non-compete can be different, so it would, but it would be important for a lawyer to take a look at that particular language, preferably before you left that job and thought you could go on your way.
Steve, I'm wondering, what if it isn't an explicit non-compete clause in a contract, but rather is just something that is stated in the company policy book? Does that make any difference?
Oh, sure it does. For the effectiveness of a covenant to survive scrutiny in court, typically you'll see the need for that covenant to be stated as part of an ancillary valid employment relationship. To have a simple one-size-fits-all prohibition in the employee manual sometimes will fail for lack of specificity, fitness to the individual's particular circumstances. You have sales reps, you have folks who work in the office, and the covenant should be tailored from an employer's perspective to meet the specific situation, and it's got to be supported by adequate consideration. So when we look at the court battles that surround enforceability of covenants, one of the cornerstone features is what did they write and how did they come to their agreement. So I think when you say it's in the employment manual,
right,
not the best place to have an enforceable covenant if you have hopes of enforcing it as an employer.
Very interesting. So whether you're an employee or an employer, it sounds like it's worth consulting with a lawyer to make sure that we've got the proper language and what that language means. Is that right?
In context of starting a new business, we all have romantic notions of our success as folks involved in commerce and industry, and we have to realize what that covenant, if there is one, what it will have in terms of an impact on your chances of success. Nobody that I know of who wants to start a new business and spend the first 6 months in court battling over a covenant that they didn't think about or they didn't consult with a lawyer on. I mean, this is a very fluid area of the law, and does pay to have somebody who specializes in this area look at the covenant
Right.
to provide some consultation.
Right. Jerry, what if an employee leaves an existing job and the former company's customers call that employee in his new business to pursue him? What's the legality surrounding that?
Well, again, it comes down to what may or may not be in certain agreements between the employee and their former company as far as non-solicitation of customers. Again, it may depend on what sort of role that employee was playing in the company. And again, there is no boilerplate language that's just going to be probably that'll work across the board for any situation. So it would be up to the employee to be careful that that sort of language is or isn't enforceable. And again, a lot of times, depending on how broad it is, it might not be, but it still needs to be looked at in the context of the entire framework of the contract.
Interesting. Nancy, I just thought of something. What if I'm working in a business and I've started a project, and this project actually gave me the idea for the startup business? Whose idea is that?
That's a good question. If you were employed by a former employer and you had a provision in your contract with the employer that everything you create while you're employed there belongs to them, then it might belong to the former employer. It might belong to you in other situations, and it's a perennial problem. Who owns the idea that folks
Right.
create?
Very interesting. So once again, it sounds like this is can be a complicated area. Probably a good idea for our viewers to consult with an attorney before making that leap into the small business. Yes?
Correct.
I do think we agree on that. Well, what I would like to talk about next is actually how to form the business. That is, whether to incorporate, what the differences are between an LLC and just a regular partnership or a sole proprietorship. So we're going to take a short break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back, and we'll be discussing issues surrounding how to form a small business.
What are you doing, dear?
My finances. Every week I divide my allowance, some to spend, some to charity. But the first thing I do is set aside 10% to save for my future.
That's awfully grown up. Did you learn that in school?
No, Dad taught me. He said if you want something tomorrow, you have to save today. Dad's saving for retirement. I'm saving for a new bike.
Choose to save. To learn how to get started, get your free Power to Choose brochure.
He's a smart man, your father.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Legal Action. We're talking today about the legal issues surrounding startups and existing small businesses. When we left in the last segment, we were about to start talking about the different types of legal entities that are available to people who are considering starting a small business. And Jerry, I'd like to go to you, and I wonder if I could pick up on that. Can I operate as a sole proprietorship, or do I have to actually form the business as a legal entity, like a corporation? What do you think about that?
Well, there's nothing that says you have to form a legal entity. You could continue to operate as a sole proprietorship if you have more than one person involved. You could create a partnership, but both those types of entities are exposing the individuals involved to personal liability in any number of ways as they go to run the business. And to protect against that, that's where the state statutes have provided that you can create a corporation or an LLC. And the LLC is something new, but basically it does provide the same protections that a corporation has for many, many years. So in that way, an individual is able to protect themselves with respect to liability and stopping, any sort of legal matters that may come against the entity at that entity level, and not go after the individual's personal assets, which I think is very important.
And we should point out that an LLC is a limited liability company.
Correct.
And we talk about initiating a business, and I've seen, and I'm sure you have as well, a wide range of folks coming into the office. I mean, I remember a lady who came in and she had an embroidery machine that she just invested a bunch of money in, and it was the neatest thing in the world to see this, because I actually visited her and saw her operation, and she wanted to know, geez, what should I do? And we went through the whole discussion of what options were available to her and what fit best for her circumstance. And it doesn't have to be an intimidating situation. It doesn't have to be a massive undertaking,
Right.
a business that has 150 employees, for instance. This
Right.
was just a lady who had raised her children, and she was creating sort of a profession out of a hobby. And we see that a lot.
In a limited liability company and a corporation, you file papers with the Secretary of State, and again, they're also, you hope that the individual we sort of work as a team with the individual's accountant to analyze potential tax issues under each and come up with the best structure legally, financially, and from a business operation standpoint that's best for the client.
Jerry raises a good point. I mean, the accountant's role in coming up with the right answer, the right fit. Again, these options that are out there, there's 5 or 6 options available to everybody, which is best, just depends on the particular circumstances. But working with an accountant is very important.
Right. And the accountants usually work very closely with the owner and the lawyers, yes, in making these decisions. But do I have this right? The key reason for incorporating, if you will, is to protect the business owner's personal assets. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That and giving a professional impression.
Yes.
It's easier to obtain insurance on the business if you're formed as a corp or an LLC.
Interesting.
And it's gives the vendors and customers that you're trying to do business with an impression that you're taking this seriously enough that you've gone and taken the time and spent the money to incorporate.
Well, Nancy, as long as we're talking about incorporating, one of the things that's always intrigued me is the name search. Apparently, when we choose a name for our business, it's important that we conduct a name search. Is that right?
Right. Gone are the days when we could search your own state's website for the name. We are now all doing business on the internet. We all have websites, so we're doing business everywhere. Even if you have a small little retail business that's shipping just over to Indiana or Kentucky, we are in competition with everybody in the country for the names in the same industry. Under trademark law, and even if you are not going to trademark your name, you have to be concerned about trademark law that you don't want to step on someone else's toes or their name. If they come after you later and say stop using the name because they used it first, you have to stop using the name, change your company letterhead, your brochures, your website, all of your email addresses, file amendments with the state. So it's a huge cost and a huge hit to the progress the company's making forward.
I always found that to be so very interesting that it's actually trickier, as you pointed out, than one thinks, that it's not enough just to search the Illinois website. Speaking of websites and online entities, what about the person who wants to form a business entity using an online service? What might you have to say about that?
I have a list of a dozen things that go wrong with online filing services forming entities. And they usually the online services tell you to seek counsel.
Yes.
What they should say is seek counsel before you make the filing, because filing the incorporation certificate is step 6. And there are steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that occur before that need some input from an accountant and a lawyer. And the cost of going back and retroactively fixing the things that can go wrong is far more than the cost of hiring
Right.
counsel in the first place.
And counsel does provide, somebody to talk to and get specific, to that particular individual's needs. And the on-site services don't have a guarantee, whereas licensed attorneys have malpractice insurance, and they're there to provide a solid recommendation.
And from a litigation perspective,
Yeah.
we have seen a number of folks coming in after the fact who have all the great intentions in the world of starting their own business, but they've fallen prey to shortcut, cut a
Right.
corner here, cut a corner there,
Well, that's
and they
what
end up in litigation
Yeah.
that they didn't intend to or didn't foresee. So
That's what I wanted to ask you, Steve. Give us an example of something you've seen where it could have been avoided had
Well,
we done it the right way.
Ownership not being documented
it's
is my pet
interesting.
peeve.
Yeah.
When I've seen it be most catastrophic is where you have a small, closely held corporation,
Right.
and an example might be that there's two brothers and a brother-in-law, and the relationship between them is all great and harmonious, and the business is good. And as they go through the formation and development, they're in a great place. Then there's a divorce, and the brother-in-law is no longer the brother-in-law. You've seen this
Right.
trot out in the third floor of the courthouse in DuPage quite often. That ends up having a cataclysmic effect on the business. And if a business wasn't set up the right way and corporate formalities weren't followed, it spills over into litigation
Right.
because folks will say, you didn't
This wasn't
follow the
paying
formalities, and I wasn't
Right.
honored as an owner, and there's 101 dispute areas that you can fall
Right.
into.
And when you're dealing with multiple partners, multiple individuals invested, you do need to expect the unexpected and have a shareholder or investor agreement to take care of some of those
Admittedly,
things.
there is a blind spot.
Even
And-
in a small business.
Even in a
yeah.
small
Yeah.
business,
Yep.
and that's generally not covered by the websites.
Right. You know,
If you do-
I'm sorry, Nancy, didn't mean to interrupt you. What I'd like to do now is take a quick break, and then when we come back, I'd like to talk about employee issues. Most of us out here are either employers or employees, so I think this will be particularly interesting to our viewers. Please come back soon, stay with us. Next, we're going to be talking about issues related to employees. We look forward to seeing you in a few minutes.
Takeout meals for just $12.99. Call now.
Sherry Pearson? You are the sole surviving heir of the King of Montonopolis, and you are now worth $45 million.
I'm rich! This can't be real.
Of course it's not real. Come on. Having money isn't about luck. Like that takeout meal. Cook at home instead, you can save thousands a year. Feed me. Feed the pig.
Hello and welcome back to Legal Action. When we left in the last segment, I said that what we were going to talk about this time around was issues related to employees. I would also like to add to that I'd like to talk about partners. If I have a business partner, Jerry, what types of things do we need to discuss in advance if we're going to set up this business together?
Right. Well, obviously, everything we've talked about is setting up a business would be appropriate. Again, you could be a corporation or LLC. As I mentioned earlier, the key would be to try to come up with some sort of shareholder agreement or operating agreement for an LLC that would establish, what would happen if one of the investors, owners wanted to leave, wanted to do something else, if there was a divorce, if there was death, disability.
So you're saying that should actually be all spelled out in writing?
As much, you can get a little too carried away sometimes with possibilities, but I think it's certainly best to do it on a clear day when you're setting up things, and as Steve said, everything's going well, rather
Right.
than waiting till the problem's there and then it's too late to try to come
Right.
together and figure out how to do it.
And if I might, one of the critical factors we see in litigation is the lack of valuation formula. when this event occurs, and it's sometimes not a question of when, but or if, but when. How do we value what our interest is in this company?
Can you actually include that in the
Yes.
in the agreement between partners?
The best agreements that I've seen do, because it ends the fight over valuation. You have a formula based upon prior earnings. You have a formula based upon. Sometimes you defer to the business's accountant to call ties. In other words, if we have a dispute, it would be up to the accountant to determine that dispute. But it's based. The best ones are based on a formula where there's no subjectivity. It's purely objective, and we know what we're going to get paid if that event occurs.
That's
a good point.
very helpful to know. Nancy, what else? Because I think this is an important point. If we're considering starting a small business together, what else? What might you add? What types of things should these partners be considering?
Most people can't afford to do a shareholder agreement when they're first starting. So at a minimum, at least create a stock ledger or LLC ledger that shows who put in what cash and intellectual property, and how much did they put in, or how much is it worth, what percent of the company are they going to receive in exchange for what they contributed, and what percent of those ownership voting rights are required to pass an issue. So if you have an 80% and a 20% owner, does it take 80 to pass an issue, or all 100?
Interesting.
At a minimum, if you're going to split the company up later, you at least know who gets what marbles to take home.
Very interesting, very interesting. All right, I'd like to move along now to the important topic of employees. Hey, Jerry, if I want to hire a part-time person, why can't I just do that and call that person an independent contractor? I believe there are tax benefits to that, aren't there?
Well, there's perceived tax benefits to having hired an independent contractor, but the IRS is very strict, state law is very strict about determining, who is an employee and who is an independent contractor, and it can depend on a facts and circumstances situation, but a lot of it depends on who has primary control in the situation, and if it looks and acts like an employee, it's probably an employee. It's you can't have an employee be an independent contractor just because you say so.
Right. And Steve, do you see on the litigation end, do you ever see any problems with small businesses designating somebody as a 1099 employee when in fact they're really employees
Yes,
of the firm?
as a matter of fact, I have seen that issue come up several times, where the employer views it as most beneficial to 1099 the employee and not have any issues that are typically visited upon them as a result of the employee status. Well, there's a statutory framework in Illinois that Jerry, I think, alluded to when he said if it sounds like an employee or quacks like a duck, it's a duck. That statute has a litmus test that would determine whether or not you can call somebody a 1099 independent contractor versus an employee. So you will get caught up in that tripwire if you're not careful and if you haven't satisfied that litmus test. So.
Very good. Yep. And Nancy, I wonder if you might have anything to contribute about contracts, employment contracts. Do you have any thoughts on whether or not those are a good idea for the small business owner? What are the benefits, the pros and cons?
Contracts in general are a great idea. The spoken word is worth the paper it's written on. When you have something in writing, you control the terms of it, whereas if there's nothing in writing, it's interpreted by a court.
Right.
On the employment contracts, it's not something that a small business can typically afford to do. So, in general contracts, the parties to the contract should make sure that they have the ability to perform on the items that are stated in the contract. And an example is if the contract says you'll purchase $1 million liability insurance policy in your office, you darn well better purchase that insurance policy, because if you haven't, it's a breach of the contract and the other party can not perform or not pay you.
Very interesting, very important. We don't have a lot of time left, and I would like to get from each of you your thoughts. What are your takeaways from this? Steve, let's start with you. Can you give us either the top 3 must-do things if
Sure.
you're thinking about opening a business, or blow away the top 3 myths?
Sure. Here's the thoughts that come to my mind based upon having seen for 23 years now. A lot of the folks that made good decisions have that investment matriculate. It sort of is a nice way of seeing their success in terms of a good decision to start with. Form your entity with the notion that it will be wildly successful. Yeah. Okay, you will hope for the best and you'll plan for the worst. If you've done that, you would follow the example of sort of a local folk hero here in DuPage County. The lady who started the Pampered Chef.
Yes.
It's a great example. Now, she had a passion and she followed her vision, and she's taken a company from a startup to a wildly successful company. And it's been a lot of hard work, but she did the right thing from the beginning.
From the get-go.
Yeah, and I would say when you are in the process of starting the business, choose carefully your partners, obviously, and then when you have a contract, you're much better served having a contract than not when you are dealing with the business world.
Very good thoughts.
Yes.
Thanks, Steve. Jerry, give us your number 1 takeaway.
As Steve said, go for the formalization. Treat it like it is going to be successful. Don't go on the cheap. Do everything as if you're going to be selling it out for multi-million dollars down the road.
I love that idea. Nancy, what do you want our viewers to take away today?
Document the things that need to be documented. Due diligence on your partners before you jump into bed with them and people that you'll be doing business with. And treat people fairly and right and ethically, and it goes a long way toward the business being successful.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you all, Jerry Cassiope, Nancy Fallon Huell, and of course, my very good friend Steve Ruffalo. Thank you all for being here today. This was a very important topic. As I said earlier, given the current state of our economy, I think we're seeing more and more small businesses come into play. So I want to say thank you to all of our viewers. Please feel free to contact the DuPage County Bar Association if you have any questions about today's show or have any questions at all and need a lawyer to help you with your startup or your existing small business. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.